Hello and welcome to this video. It's an interlude, I call it, because I did promise in the previous video that I would work on the tasks and task features, but then at some point in another previous video I mentioned that it might be interesting to make a generic DAO, and I've revisited the idea and thought that would be a fun challenge, so we'll just do that in this video. So I have these Mock DAO classes which just store data in a list, and they're used to do tests for my service layer, my services. And I just realized that all these Mock DAOs, they look very similar, so I want to take all that similarity and put in one place. That's the idea of this video. And yeah, my mock classes are going to be pretty similar. Yeah, I have a task mock currently and a user mock, and we'll just compare them in a minute. And then at some point I'm going to do a project mock and a subtask mock and maybe a sprint mock and a DAO and so on. And I don't want to copy paste the same code over and over, so I'll just make one class that manages everything, more or less and almost. So that's the idea. We'll use generics. Some of you might not really be too familiar with this, but it's the same as when you have an array list and then you use those angled brackets, braces, to say this array list now contains a task or a project or whatever. So it's a class that we write when we don't know what kind of object it will use later on. Then we can make it generic and give it a type parameter. We'll see how that works. So here's the idea. I have my two interfaces, the user DAO and task DAO, and I will have more interfaces later on. And we can see that, well, that's sort of the pattern that I will have. These create, find, update, delete methods. Those are going to be the same, with the same kind of responsibility and same kind of behavior in all of the DAO interfaces. The project DAO will have a create, find, update, delete. The subtask will have create, find, update, delete. And it's just in all of my mock classes that behavior is going to be the same over and over. So currently I have implementations that implements the interface. So I have a user mock DAO and task mock DAO. So we're focusing on the mock classes, not the task Postgres DAO. And maybe I'll revisit those later on, but those are at least more challenging to make generic, but maybe we will revisit that. Right. But they both have same similarity, same kind of functionality here. The argument is just the difference. User or task, and find returns a task versus the user, but otherwise they sort of promise the same thing. User and task, we might call them entities. So basically a DAO can create an entity, find an entity, update an entity, and delete an entity. But then I have specific ones. So how do we specifically create a user? How do we specifically create a task? That's the behavior we have here. But that common thing, I mean, these methods in the task and user mock DAO, they look very similar. So instead of copy pasting them and also in a new mock DAO, I'm going to take that functionality and put into an abstract class. I call it generic mock DAO, and it has this type parameter. And we can see we can create an entity of type T, or create a user of an entity of type user, or create an entity of type task. So over here we just work with T because we do not add the point of creating the class. When I write the class, I don't know what the actual entity will be, the type of the entity. Is it a user or is it a task? But when I create an instance of the class, then I can define this generic mock DAO works with users and another one works with tasks. So that's the type parameter. When I create an instance, I define the type that replaces T. So this class is going to have all that similar behavior, and we just extend from that. And usually I would have, when I implement an interface here, my user Mock DAO would have to create implementations for all the methods up here. But I inherit those implementations from over here, so I don't have to have them down here. So my user Mock DAO will be very slim. There will be very little code in this one, and the same for that one, for the task. And I do say very little, but there will be some, whenever we have something that sticks out, unique behavior, the user DAO has find by username, but obviously I don't have that method on the task. And maybe on the subtask DAO, I may have a method called find by task ID. So there might be some small differences, and all those differences will have to be implemented in the specific classes. So in the user Mock DAO, I will have a find by username. So this is the idea. I rework the mock classes so they can be used for future testing, and it's just easy. I don't have to implement a new project Mock DAO, because it will do pretty much the same thing. So I can just inherit that same behavior from the generic Mock DAO. So let's give that a go. It's going to be something like this. So it's only something that I need in my tests, right? So I'm going to put that in here is something that I need for my service tests, because my acceptance tests use the real implementation up here, right? That actually contacts the database. We saw that. But I have my task mock and I have my user mock, and these are the ones that I want to replace. So let's just compare them so you can see the similarities. Right, they implement a DAO interface. We have a list of saved something, whether it's user or task. The constructor instantiate that list. The create, let's just expand this. We'll just put it in the list. Same thing. Here we look through the list and find something by the ID, find by ID, or throw an exception. And I actually forgot here, task, like that. And the update will just override something. And we have exactly the same thing over here. It's just of type user. And you see, this is actually the only place I define it. Well, that's also type here. But implementation wise, when I would create a new project DAO, I would basically just copy all this and copy paste, come on. And then I would just rework all the, where it says user, I would just make a project. So that's what I want to avoid. So we do a new one, we call it, where do we put it? Put it in my service test, that's where it's needed. Create a new class, and I call it generic mock DAO. That's what I call it in the slides. And this one has a generic type parameter like that. And let's just put that over here so we can compare. And I'm going to need something before I start implementation. So you can see this is just any kind of object. So if I would have a method here, private void method, and it takes a T entity. Now the methods available is just those that are available on the object type. And I need one method. I need get by ID here. I need to get the ID, because all my model classes, my user and my task here, they have IDs. All of my entities or model classes, whatever you want to call them, they all have IDs. And if I just follow the structure that they all use UUID, it's better in C# when they call it GUID. GUID. Anyway, so I need at least to have this type here. It needs a method called getID. And I can do that by saying, so here I say I want a new interface. I call it entity. And this has a method getID. Okay. And then, for example, on my user, we would say implements entity. Okay, and that's it, because I already have the getID. We do the same thing on my task. We say implements entity. Yeah, I want to edit entity. Right, and that's it because I already have the ID, get the ID method. So that's a quick fix that didn't really change anything. And then here I can say that I can only give it type parameters, which somehow extends either a class or an interface, but we use extends in either way, and I just say it must be of type entity. Right, so then you're thinking, could I just instead say my class works with entities, but that means I could actually mix everything that is an entity. I could put that in here, so I could put tasks and users in the same DAO, and I don't want that. I want to say my DAO, the specific instance that I have, works with one type of entity, whether that's task or user or project, but not multiple types. Alright, so we do use T. And now my entity has a getID method because that comes from the entity interface. So now we're ready. I need a list, but it is of type T, and I call it saved entities. Yeah. I need a constructor like that, and we don't get anything, but we just say entities equals new array list, like that. And then we need all these methods. We'll start here just with these, and then we will expand as needed. So there's no override because I don't extend anything, so we'll just remove this and save tasks, just replace that, and instead of all these specific entities, it's just T entity. So now my generic Mock DAO can save an entity of whatever type. I can find an entity by the ID, and like this, we call it entity. And it looks through the list, looks for whatever entity has the correct ID, and then returns that. Now it's no longer a task, it's an entity like this. And here we take some entity. Oh, sorry. Name entity. And saved entities. We look for one that has the ID. If it's not found, we say this entity was not found, and that's it. So now I have one class that can be instantiated to contain users or tasks or projects or whatever, so I don't need these specific ones anymore. Okay, so that's just to keep status. That's the generic Mock DAO. And we have the user interfaces. And now I need these. So let's start by saying, so I have this idea, we'll see how it works out. I call it Mock DAOs, that's a class here. And then inside I make a public class, and I call it user DAO, user Mock DAO, and it extends the generic Mock DAO and contains users like this, and it implements the user. I need to edit, yes. And let's just import that one, user DAO, like that. And this one, oh sorry, the generic should be abstract. That should be it. And I have a class like that. And I do have that single method. Find by username, and then the ID, sorry, the delete, but this delete one should actually be here. Right. I just haven't done with it anything with it. Public void delete some ID, and then throw new unsupported operation exception. At some point I'll need this. Okay. So this is my new user mock compared to the old user mock. Right, much simpler. I'll just implement this in a minute. I also have my task mock DAO. Again, extends generic mock, but this time with a task. and implements task DAO like this. And I have to import. And that's it. This one does not currently have other methods outside of the create, update, delete, read. So this is my task mock DAO now. Super simple. And the user mock, and this is what I had before, and my task mock had the same code, right? But now it's just centralized in that super class. And we'll just do this one. Find by username. I can copy this. It's not saved users, now it's saved entities. So saved entities, I have access to that in the superclass. And then next time when I need, or sometimes in the future, I need a project mock DAO, I will just extend generic mock DAO and has project, right? Implements project DAO like this. And obviously I don't have a project model yet, and project DAO would also be created, but now I have a new mock for this type. So centralized behavior, pretty easy so far. Let's see how it works out. So we start with the user mock DAO, and let's just delete this one. But I don't need it anymore, hopefully, so I'll delete it. I have everything under git version control, so I can undo this. And it's being used, obviously, but I'll just hard delete it, and then I will get some failures in here. Right, fails everything. All of it fails. Get first user. Okay, that's something I have to rework, because that was something I made specifically. But we'll just fix that. Okay, user mock DAO. Now it's a what did I call it? Mock DAOs dot user mock DAO, and it's not an enclosing class. What does that mean? Make static. Okay, so this has to be a static class. That's a bit weird, but again, I'm used to C#, so that okay. But now I have my user DAO, and let's say should instantiate. This test is not super relevant anymore, but just to test it. And this one here, whenever I have get first user, and I'm actually using that many times, 5 times, 3, 4, 5, right? And the way we did it for the task service tests, I would actually just access the list and get the first one. So I didn't have a specific method for that. So that's definitely what we are going to do over here as well. So let's say mock this one. So I'm going to say replace this with, but then it's saved entities. And let's just replace all. There we go. So now we can see that I removed that method that I didn't really need. And saved users, this one I probably have multiple places also. We can see 7 times. So I just want to replace Control R. It's now saved entities. Replace all. There we go. And that's it. So I'm using a mock. And as always, whenever we rework and break potentially all the stuff, we will just rerun the tests. Oh, and should delete obviously fails because I haven't deleted this. Sorry, I haven't deleted it. I haven't made that implementation in here. So let's just say and I had that implementation in the user class, the user mock DAO, which I deleted. So let me just find that on GitHub again. All right, here we are. Saved users is now saved entities, and let's just rename this to E, and this one to E for entity. That's fine. Okay, so this one, rework that test. Now works. Everything works. So the other test that failed before, that's, I guess, and I don't even know which one it was, but that probably used the delete as well. Just, I have many tests. That's nice. Yeah. So that was the user. Let's just delete this one. This doesn't have anything interesting in it, so delete. And task services. Here we say this is now a mock DAOs.taskMock, and it's a new one like that. Yes, and all of these should be replaced to saved entities, all 3 of them. There we go. So minor rework. Did I click it? Yeah, it's compiling. Okay. And just to, because I like to see all that green stuff, run all the tests. Just to appreciate it a little bit. Right, everything works, so that means I'm allowed to commit stuff. Swapped out specific mock DAOs for generic approach. Alright, I'll put that to GitHub, and there is one thing that I sort of skipped and might be useful to do. So let's just see here, my user DAO and my task DAO, they look the same. Right? Create, find, update, and delete, which I should have over here at some point. But there's no constraint. I could call it read, and I could call it find, and then in the project DAO I could call it get. And that would totally break my generic stuff here, because this one relies on those methods being called the same thing: find, update, delete, and create. And I don't want to go into details on that, but if I rename this get, just to show you the problem, now this one I have to implement the get method. And the way to fix that would be to make a generic DAO which has all the common methods, and then this one would say extend generic DAO of type user, and my generic DAO class here, this one would also implement that generic interface. I leave that as an exercise to you if you want to do it. Alternatively, if you're strict and follow these naming conventions, it will still work, but you're not forced to do it unless you do that generic interface like I mentioned. You can give it a shot if you're interested. Okay, that's it for this video. Whenever I move forward, I have my generic mock classes here. Pretty easy to create a new one. I don't have to duplicate all kinds of code, so that's potentially nice. And hopefully in the next video I will start working on the task tests as promised. So for now, thank you for watching.